what really makes us human? I mean, I often think about this deep, almost primal urge we have to connect, to build families. It feels so fundamental. It runs through all of human history, right? From basic survival needs way back when to, I don't know, the big philosophical questions we ask ourselves.
Absolutely. And when you look across different fields, I mean, really, look, this theme just pops up again and again. Connection. Family.
Right.
So for this deep dive, we've pulled together research from, well, all over. Anthropology, biology, psychology, sociology, even philosophy gets in on it.
So many angles. So our mission today really is to try and get to the heart of it. How and why do humans actually create families?
Exactly. We want to navigate all this information, all these different viewpoints on this, well, this core part of being human.
It's definitely something I find fascinating, and I bet a lot of you listening do too. Okay, so where do we start? Maybe with the basics, like what even is family? Sounds simple, but the research suggests maybe not so much.
Yeah, that's the first hurdle. There's really no single definition that works everywhere, all the time. Anthropology especially really highlights this.
Okay.
What family means changes so much depending on the culture, the time period, the social rules. It's incredibly fluid. One key difference that often comes up is between family and household. Family often puts the emphasis on genetic links, on inheritance.
Right.
And you often see kind of traditional gender roles tied into that idea of women may be seen as the emotional core, the reproductive center, men more in the legal decision-making role, especially around property and lineage.
Okay, so family has that sense of bloodline, maybe formal status, and household then is?
Household is more about the day-to-day stuff, sharing a roof, pooling resources, who lives together, who works together. It doesn't necessarily depend on being related by blood or marriage.
Got it. Practicality.
Exactly. And anthropologists, they found just an amazing variety of structures. There's the nuclear family, parents and kids, which, we often think of as standard in the West.
Yeah.
But it's actually more common in industrialized societies and, interestingly, also in some highly mobile hunter-gatherer groups.
Really? Foragers, too? That seems unexpected.
It does, doesn't it? But that mobility, that need for a smaller, flexible unit seems to favor it in those contexts. Then you have extended families, multiple generations, maybe several sibling units, all functioning together. Very common in agricultural societies where, more hands are needed for labor and self-sufficiency is key.
Makes sense.
We're also seeing more blended families now, obviously, with remarriage becoming more common. And then there are polygamous setups, polygyny, one man, multiple wives, and the rarer polyandry, one woman, multiple husbands.
Wow, the diversity is just...
Yeah,
the research also mentioned things like descent patterns and residence patterns. How do they fit in?
Yes. So descent is about how you trace your lineage. Matrilineal is through the father's side, matrilineal through the mother's, or bilateral, tracing through both. And residence patterns are about where a new couple lives. Patrilocal, with the husband's family, matrilocal with the wife's, or neolocal, where they set up their own new household.
And these patterns really shape things, I imagine. Power, resources.
Absolutely. They have a huge impact. But the main takeaway here is that our idea of family and kinship, it's not just about biology. It's primarily shaped by society and culture.
How so?
It's built on social norms, the kinship ties. A culture recognizes how that culture interprets biology, its traditions, and of course the emotional bonds people form.
So it's more about the meaning we give those relationships than just the genetics.
Precisely. Evolutionary anthropology suggests, early hunter-gatherers relied on small kin groups for survival, sharing food, protection.
Oh, right, safety in numbers.
And then farming comes along and structures get more complex. Suddenly, land ownership, inheritance, labor, they become central to family organization.
And sociology has its own takes too, right?
Oh, yeah. Functionalism, for example, sees family as like a vital organ for society. It teaches kids the rules, regulates sex, gives people a social position.
Like your family name giving you status.
Exactly, that kind of thing. Then symbolic interactionism looks closer at the micro level. How do we actually do family day to day? How do we interpret being a parent, a child, a sibling? How do those interactions shape who we are?
That's interesting.
And sociologists today are also looking hard at how things like, people moving around more, lower birth rates, changing ideas about gender, how all that is shaking up families right now.
And psychology, where does that fit? It feels like there's a deep need there.
Oh, absolutely. Psychologically, the drive to form families seems rooted in this fundamental human need for connection, for belonging. It's not just nice to have, It's apparently essential for our mental health, our identity.
Like core to who we are.
Exactly. Attachment theory really gets into this, how those first relationships with caregivers shape our ability to form bonds throughout life. You probably, think about your own early experiences and see echoes of that.
Yeah, definitely. So if we're asking what's really essential for a family, it's maybe less about the specific structure
Right.
and more about fulfilling these core needs, connection, defined roles, passing on culture in some way.
That seems to be the common thread. You find kinship systems, groups focused on raising kids and mutual support pretty much everywhere, in every culture we know of.
Even if a specific form looks totally different.
Exactly. And yeah, big historical shifts like the Industrial Revolution definitely changed things, like the rise of the nuclear family in the West is often linked to that. But extended families are still incredibly important in vast parts of the world. It's not a simple linear progression everywhere.
Okay, so that's the social, the cultural, the structural side of things. But you mentioned biology earlier. There's actual, physical stuff happening in our bodies driving this connection, right? It's not all just learned.
Oh, absolutely not. We seem biologically wired for connection, and hormones are huge players here. Oxytocin is probably the most famous one, the love hormone.
Right.
It helps with social bonding, trust, empathy. It gets released during, touch, close interactions. It gives you that feeling of warmth, security, contentment you get from being close to someone.
So that cozy feeling after a good hug, that's oxytocin.
That's likely a big part of it. And it affects both men and women, though maybe in slightly different ways sometimes. It really reinforces trust, which is so vital for cooperation, especially in raising kids.
Okay. What else is involved? I think I saw vasopressin mentioned.
Yeah, vasopressin is related. It seems quite important for what researchers call mate guarding and forming pair bonds, especially in males. Interestingly, it's also been linked to jealousy.
Jealousy? Huh. An evolutionary leftover, maybe? Protecting the bond?
That's one way to think about it, yeah. Then you've got dopamine. That's all about the brain's reward system.
Ah, the pleasure chemical.
Exactly. Get the big boost during that intense phase of romantic love. Makes you feel good, reinforces the desire to stick close to that person.
So that heady, can't get enough feeling of new love, that's partly dopamine flooding the system.
Precisely. And there are others involved too, especially early on. Norepinephrine, cortisol, serotonin. They play roles in things like heightened attention, the stress or excitement of a new relationship, maybe that initial obsessive focus.
That's a whole cocktail of chemicals.
It really is. And what's really wild is that there seems to be a genetic component too.
You mean some people are genetically more inclined to bond?
Well, variations in the genes related to oxytocin and vasopressin receptors. The things these hormones latch onto in the brain have been linked to differences in pair bonding behaviors. Things like commitment levels, fidelity.
Wow. So it's not just upbringing. Our actual genes might play a part.
It looks that way. But, and this is crucial, it's almost certainly not one single gene for monogamy or anything that simple. It's likely a very complex mix of many genes interacting with each other and with our environment, our experiences.
Okay, nature and nurture working together.
Always. And from an evolutionary angle, all this makes a lot of sense, right? Pair bonding, stable family units, they would have massively boosted the chances of kids surviving.
How so?
More parental investment, maybe a division of labor and childcare, better protection. It might have even helped reduce conflict between males and allowed for more cooperation overall. Some theories even link pair bonding to the evolution of our big brains and complex societies.
So there's this deep neurobiological push towards forming these close bonds.
Seems like it. Which connects right back to what you were saying about the physical and mental states we experience. It's not just an idea. It's happening in our brains and bodies.
But even with all that biological wiring, the culture still shapes how it plays out.
Absolutely. Biology provides the, let's say, the raw materials, the underlying drive, but culture writes the script for how we express it, what forms those connections take.
Right. And the survival advantage for kids, that seems like a really powerful driver throughout history.
Definitely a key part of the evolutionary story.
Okay, so we've got social structures, we've got the biology. Now let's dig into the psychological landscape. What's going on in our minds and emotions? What's the feeling part of creating family?
Well, at the absolute core, psychologically speaking, is that profound need for connection and belonging we talked about. It's not just a want. It feels like a fundamental drive. It shapes so much of our thinking, feeling, behavior. It's critical for mental health, for well-being, even for knowing who we are.
It's foundational.
Totally. Think about Maslow's hierarchy, Love and belonging come right after basic safety and physiological needs. That tells you how important they are.
So not having that connection, it's not just sad, it's actively bad for us.
The research suggests yes. Loneliness, anxiety, depression, even physical health seems to suffer when people lack strong social bonds. And then, emotions themselves play such a vital role within the family.
Like how?
Think about laughter, crying, even anger sometimes, happiness. They're not just random feelings. They're how we communicate, how we bond, how we relieve stress, how we share joy, and navigate tough times together. They're kind of the emotional glue, you know?
Yeah, the glue. I like that. Our sources also mention intuition, that gut feeling in relationships.
Right. Intuition can be a powerful guide, helping us sense when something's off or steer us towards choices that meet our deeper needs for connection. And empathy, of course, is crucial.
Being able to feel with someone else.
Exactly. Understanding and sharing what others are feeling. In a family, that lets us respond effectively to each other's needs, build stronger bonds, offer real support. This deep need for connection really drives the desire for intimacy and family.
And those specific emotions, the laughing, the crying, they're the tools we use to build and maintain those bonds day to day.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They're integral to how we interact and communicate within that family setting.
What about intention? Is there a psychological take on why we express emotions the way we do in families? Are we trying to achieve something?
That's a great question. It gets into ideas about intentionality and also emotional regulation. Often, there are underlying intentions, maybe wanting closeness, maybe needing space, maybe asserting ourselves even if we aren't fully conscious of them.
Oh.
And a huge part of healthy family life is learning to understand not just what we feel, but maybe why, and then figuring out how to express it constructively, regulating those emotions so they build connection, not break it down.
It's also tangled together, isn't it? Biology, psychology, society. Okay, shifting gears slightly, the research really hammered home how sociocultural forces shape all this. It's not just happening inside us. The world outside plays a huge role.
Oh, massively. The way families form, what's considered normal, it changes dramatically depending on the time and place. Just look at how people find partners.
Yeah, that history was wild.
Right. Early 20th century, it was often super formal. Courtship, chaperones, calling cards, very structured.
Like something out of Jane Austen almost.
Kind of. Then you get in the 20s and 30s, things loosen up a bit. More casual dating, dating for fun. The car makes a big difference, gives people more freedom.
Independence.
Yeah. In the 40s, 50s, you get going steady, more defined dating etiquette. The 60s and 70s bring more liberal attitudes, less focus on rigid gender roles, more about mutual attraction, maybe dating around.
Right.
Then the 80s and 90s, you start seeing matchmaking services, the very early days of the internet's influence.
Yeah.
And now
it's apps everywhere. AI trying to find your soulmate.
Exactly. Online dating, AI, matchmaking, it's made meeting people incredibly accessible, but maybe also raises questions about, feeling like just another profile, that dehumanization aspect. It's a huge shift in how we even initiate relationships.
And it's not just how we meet, but when we decide to settle down, have kids. That's changed too, hasn't it? Influenced by outside stuff.
Absolutely. Economic factors are huge. Recessions, job insecurity, people often put off marriage, delay having kids. Financial stability feels like a prerequisite for many.
Understandably.
And think about the impact of more women getting higher education, entering the workforce in large numbers. That changes calculations around family size, timing, traditional roles. It gives women more options.
Right.
And obviously, things like wealth and income have a big impact on a family's well-being, the opportunities kids have. Then you layer on social values, cultural traditions.
That's so.
Well, those ingrained beliefs shape everything. Norms about marriage, how you raise kids, what's considered a proper family. Religious beliefs often play a big role in defining acceptable structures and roles. And don't forget social movements, women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights. They've fundamentally challenged older norms and pushed for recognition of more diverse family forms.
Which leads to a really critical point from the research, the need for cultural humility when we encounter families different from our own.
Absolutely essential. When you're dealing with something this personal and this culturally varied, you have to approach it with respect. Recognize the huge diversity in values, in parenting styles. Avoid imposing your own beliefs. Be curious. Try to understand their perspective.
So the trend might be towards more individual choice in picking partners.
Seems that way, yeah. More autonomy.
But money matters. Society's rules matter. Culture matters. They all still exert a strong pull on when and how families actually get made.
Definitely. And that ethical piece, that cultural sensitivity, is just non-negotiable when talking about family.
Okay. So we form families for all these complex, interwoven reasons: biology, psychology, society. But what's the effect? What impact do families have, good and bad, on individuals and on society?
Well, the positive side first. Stable, supportive families. They provide so much. Emotional warmth, security, that sense of belonging we keep coming back to.
Yeah.
That's all vital for healthy development.
A safe base.
Exactly. And families are where we first learn how to be social beings, right?
Right.
They pass down values, beliefs, ways of behaving. They teach us how to relate to others and just doing things together, talking openly. That's linked to better physical and mental health, too. It strengthens those bonds.
So a strong family is like a buffer, a support system.
A really important one. But the flip side is also true. When families break down or when there's cruelty or violence, the impact can be devastating.
How so?
Well, research links family disruption, like divorce or separation, with higher risks for kids in several areas: delinquency, substance use, anxiety, problems at school, depression.
Wow.
And active cruelty or violence within the family, emotional abuse, physical, sexual. The scars can be incredibly deep and long-lasting. We're talking PTSD, chronic depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, major difficulties forming healthy relationships later on.
That's heartbreaking. The place that should be safest becomes the source of harm.
It's tragic. And worse, these patterns can sometimes repeat across generations. Plus, fractured families, widespread dysfunction, that can contribute to bigger problems in society, too.
Is there any hope when things go wrong? Can families bounce back?
Yes, absolutely. It's important to talk about resilience, too. Many families do cope with incredible adversity.
What helps them do that?
Things like strong communication, good problem-solving skills, trying to maintain a positive outlook, being adaptable, having support from outside the family, friends, community. These factors really help.
So interventions often focus on building those strengths.
Exactly. Strengthening those resilience factors is key. The research is clear. Stable, supportive families are hugely beneficial. Disruption and violence are hugely harmful. But understanding resilience gives us pathways forward.
It seems like a good point to bring in something else from our research, the role of AI. It sounds almost sci-fi, but it seems AI is starting to intersect with family life.
It is, yeah. And it's definitely a bit of a double-edged sword. Lots of potential, but also some real concerns.
What kind of potential?
Well, AI is incredibly good at analyzing massive amounts of data. Think social media, dating app usage, academic studies. AI could potentially spot patterns in relationship formation, compatibility factors, family dynamics that we might miss.
So AI could give us new scientific insights into relationships.
Potentially, yes. And we're already seeing AI-powered tools being developed for mental health and relationship support.
Like chatbots giving advice.
Sort of. Chatbots are virtual assistants offering coping strategies, maybe guidance on communication skills, that kind of thing. There's also hope AI might help with early detection of mental health issues or tailoring treatments better. And of course, the big one is dating apps using AI algorithms.
Trying to predict compatibility.
Right. Matching people based on stated preferences, behaviors, trying to figure out who might click.
I imagine there's skepticism. Can an algorithm really understand love?
That's the core question, isn't it? There are definite concerns about authenticity. Does talking to an AI feel real? Is there a risk of dehumanizing these very personal connections? Can AI truly grasp emotional nuance, empathy, the sheer complexity of human relationships?
Probably not fully.
Seems unlikely, at least for now. So AI might become a useful assistant in some areas, analysis, maybe some basic support, matchmaking attempts. But that genuine human connection, that deep emotional bond, technology probably can't replicate that. Its limitations are important to keep in mind.
Okay, one last area our deep dive touched on was philosophy. How have thinkers historically viewed family? Does it offer a different kind of perspective?
It really does. Philosophy has pretty much always recognized family as fundamentally important. You go back to ancient thinkers like Aristotle or Confucius. They saw family as the basic building block of a healthy society, crucial for individual virtue and well-being.
So not just a private matter, but socially vital.
Exactly. The Stoics, too, people like Seneca, Cicero, often talked about marriage and having children as like a duty to society, part of living a good, virtuous life. And more recently, perspectives like the ethics of care really emphasize the moral weight of our close relationships, especially family.
So ethics comes into play. How we treat each other within the family.
Definitely. But philosophy also touches on the personal meaning. For many people, creating a family, raising kids, continuing a lineage, that provides a powerful sense of purpose.
A reason for being.
In a way, yes. And thinking about mortality, about the fact that life is finite. Philosophy often suggests that this actually makes our relationships more valuable, more precious.
Because time is limited.
Right. And when you ask those big questions like what happens after we die, philosophical ideas about legacy, about contributing something that lasts beyond you, those often tie back to family, to nurturing the next generation.
So philosophy kind of elevates the significance of family, connecting it to virtue, meaning, legacy.
It provides that broader context, yeah. It reinforces that this isn't just a biological urge or a social convention. It touches on some of the deepest questions about how to live a meaningful life.
Okay, this has been quite the journey. We've looked at creating family through so many different lenses. Biology, psychology, society, culture, history, philosophy is clearly incredibly complex.
It really is. So many interwoven threads.
Right.
But what stands out, I think, is that despite all the variations in how families look and function, that fundamental human need for connection, for love, support, belonging, that seems to be the constant.
Yeah, that's the core. And it's interesting how exploring AI's potential role almost reinforces how unique and irreplaceable that genuine human connection really is.
Right. Technology might help around the edges, but it doesn't seem likely to replace the real thing.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that initial question, why do we create families? It really does get to the heart of being human, doesn't it?
It really does. Family, in whatever form it takes, remains so central to us as individuals and to society as a whole. It definitely leaves you thinking. Here's a final thought, maybe. As technology like AI becomes even more integrated into our lives, how might that continue to reshape how we understand family, how we experience it? And, maybe more importantly, what are those core human needs we absolutely have to keep centered as things keep changing? Something to ponder.
This is DigitView.